Hi everybody. So this video today is going to be a lot different than what some of my more recent videos on my channel have been about. So yeah, I'm really excited to do this video. I'm going to go ahead and start this video off like any other video, and I'm going to pray real quick and then we'll get into everything else. So Father, we thank you for this day. I thank you for this opportunity and for this project, for this schooling. I thank you for just this education. And I thank you for our professor and just everything, Lord. I thank you for this assignment. In Jesus' name, speak through me and bless me, that my words be thy words, that thy words be my words, Father. And I just ask that you guide me, that I preach and speak your honest truth, and I speak the honest truth of people. In Jesus' name, I thank you and I pray, Father. And Father, please touch whoever watches this, Lord, as well. In Jesus' name, amen. So, I am really excited to be doing this project. This is like one of those projects that really goes hand in hand with not just my own YouTube channel, but then it's like incorporating my YouTube channel with my schooling. So I'm really excited about this. I'm going to be focusing on the earth and explaining how they respect and nurture the earth, but also how the earth ties into their beliefs and dimensional beliefs. And then I'm going to move on into storytelling and dreaming, and how that basically goes hand in hand with their artwork. And I must say that some of the Aboriginal artwork is probably one of the few pieces of artwork that has really, or I shouldn't say few pieces, but one of the few collections of artwork that I have really been drawn to. And part of it is because of these intricate pieces of in attention to detail that you see in other cultures, but not necessarily in the same sense as Aboriginals. And in this viewpoint of the afterlife, in dimensional aspects of life itself, are really cool. So we're just gonna jump into it, guys. Here we go. I have a couple of questions that I'm kind of feeding off of here and there to go through this video, but basically I'm gonna try my best in this video to do a complete talk through. And I'm gonna insert some pictures and some little things here and there that you guys will notice, just to kind of correlate with what I'm talking about, to give you guys a visual representation of all of this stuff. So to start out, a lot of us are familiar, at least, with the out of Africa theory and how that ties into our modern placement. For the most part, a lot of us kind of struggle with the timeline and don't really understand, and yeah, it can be kind of difficult. To just kind of give you guys a layout of the background, about roughly 100,000 years ago, people began to, Homo sapiens, you start to see pop up on the earth amongst these other groups of our genus, basically. Be like Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo Neanderthal. There's a lot of Neanderthal. There's a lot of different groups that were around during this time, and then Homo sapiens pop up in Africa and begin to migrate from Africa throughout the rest of the world. This is one of the theories on how people came to be. There are other theories, but for the most part, science chooses right now, modern science, to acknowledge the out of Africa theory as being the most possible and most theoretically true theory, or true version of our history. So to correlate with that, Aboriginals have been in Australia for roughly what we would consider about 60,000 years. There was a migration out of Africa, and from Africa through India and down into what we now know as modern day Australia. So when we look at these people and we look at these different people groups and how they've migrated, and I know a lot of people get confused with race and all of that stuff and how that pertains to things. The out of Africa model is very, I guess, explanatory in the very basis that people migrated in different areas at different times, and because of their locations, people began to evolve and have different distinct physical features from one another. So kind of use my background to explain. We're basically talking about the crest of civilization being right in this area, and then Aboriginals moving out and moving downward into the islands and later on into Australia. Aboriginal history is based upon their belief and their respect of their ancestors. Now, what really got me about Aboriginals and learning about them more in this whole process of doing this project was that ancestors is not how we see with some other indigenous people groups or other native groups, like, for instance, Navajo or Inuit people in Alaska. Although these groups have kept a lot of their traditions, I did notice that with the Aboriginals, one of the biggest changes or differences I saw was that when they refer to ancestors, they're referring to spirits and deities that are based upon certain premises that are separate from what we know in the Western world when we refer to, or what we come to refer to as ancestors, especially when we're talking about Native American groups. To touch on a little bit more deeply in this real quick before we jump back to the rest of the video, I wanted to kind of include this piece because I know this is something that, especially if you're not an anthropology major or a soft science major, or even a science major, you may not really understand or know. And one of those things is that human beings have a really odd display that is really different, not odd, but a cool display that is completely separate than any other species on this planet. And that is the ability to think about our own existence in a separate way. Along with many other things that we definitely do differently than other species on this planet, there is an honest thing that we see cross-culturally across the world, from whether it be 150,000 years ago to just last 1,000 years ago to 2,000 years, right? We see this consistent basis of humans really nourishing the idea of trying to understand time, trying to understand where we come from and where we fit into this universe and this world, and how we fit into this universe and this world, and how we were created, and where we come from, and what's next after this life, and what was before it. And we constantly have these questions that are constantly coming up. So we're definitely this video is going to delve more deeply into that. But on top of that, just keep that in mind when we're looking at Aboriginal art, is that a lot of this is based on explanation. This is based on their explanation in a lot of ways from the ancestors, and in how things came about, and where we came from, and how the mountains were created, and how the stream is intricately tied into the kangaroo, and how that is intricately tied into our own survival, and just a multitude of things, and how these different species that are walking the outback are all tied into one another, and how there's different deities in these cultures who all are assimilated in different aspects, whether it be through plants and animals or people themselves or hybrids of all of them. There's a lot of different really cool things that I'm going to talk about in this video, but in a lot of ways there's a lot of different cool things that Aboriginal art has to show and has to offer. So if you're watching this video on my YouTube channel, hashtag the truth and the light on YouTube, please be sure to check out Professor Sigmund's website. I'm going to tag or add that into the description box below, and please be sure to check out a lot of this art online, and I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of the references that I have from doing this study, and just there's so much cool stuff that I have learned about this and pertaining to spirituality, but in a lot of ways pertaining to anthropology and just pertaining to us and where we come from, and it's really cool. So yeah, check that out, and now we're gonna get back to the video. So Aboriginals have these paintings, these beautiful, intricate paintings that are absolutely stunning. And when you notice their artwork, it's not what we look at similarly to what we think of when we think of art, and we think of brushstrokes, and we think of carvings. And Aboriginals have a meaning to each and every aspect in which that they formulate their art. In that picture that you guys just saw, that a lot of these paintings involve dots and lines and asymmetrical positionings that are meant to show different representations of different points in time, not just points in time, different dimensional time periods, and also on top of that, or maybe not time period, but locations, different dimensional locations. But on top of that are also thought to have been in a sense, code for certain different things. And I'll get more into that in just a minute. So, yeah. There is not one line on a rock or on a carving that was not meant for a specific thing or to show a certain dynamic of something. And I think that's absolutely stunning, mind-boggling how intricate all of these pieces are. So we call these paintings basically, this is called the dreaming. And this is called the dreaming because these paintings are very good representatives of these walks of life and these experiences in life, and how those experiences fall into dimensional patterns and dimensional beliefs that some of us, especially in the Western world, we don't really necessarily identify with or even really understand. So I'm going to go over those beliefs a little bit more and just kind of give you guys more of a better understanding. Aboriginals believe in the human world, the physical world, and then on top of that, the spiritual world. And how these worlds are different dimensions and different realms, if we will, that all coexist and coincide with one another and are yet separate from one another at the same time. And this belief is what leads them into having this viewpoint of what we call totemic ancestors, which are basically ancestors that are thought to be a mix of plant, animal, and human base. So basically, in other words, these ancestors are meant to have been the basis of life itself as far as life on Earth is what we know it, plants, animals, and humans, and a mix of them. Mind-boggling how other cultures have similar views and yet they're so far apart, and it's not thought that they ever actually mingled or anything like that prior to leaving Africa. So it's after leaving Africa. So it's really cool. So these techniques symbolize different aspects of Aboriginal life and Aboriginal history. And these different lines and dots and all of these things that we're seeing are meant to show a greater depth to the image itself. So although the image may be symbolizing a kangaroo, the dots and the placement of certain animals and things around that kangaroo may hint or suggest that there are other things around that kangaroo that are not necessarily just in the human world, but in the physical world and the spirit world. So there's a couple different ways that you can look at these paintings, and there's a couple different views that you can take from them, depending on how you're looking at the painting and how how you choose to actually perceive it. And I think that's really cool because in a lot of other art, especially European art, particularly from about, I would say 1700s until probably about the early 1900s, there's a very basic, in-your-face, point-blank symbolism. Whereas in Aboriginal art, you're seeing a very intricate and very detailed amount of time and effort and thought that was put into this in a different way. Not in a just to create a beautiful painting, but in a way to almost guide people and to guide those who may see the painting in the future. And it's very, very communal almost in the way that it's presented. And I'll get a little bit more into that again, like I said, here in a little bit. So, yeah. Aboriginals have used a multitude of different techniques when it goes from dot paintings to rock carvings to intricately detailed bark paintings and engravings, and just these things that we don't necessarily see in other aspects of Western art in the same way. And I think that it's very, very, very important to point out that in a lot of ways there is a lot of symbolism in what that art was drawn on and what that art was used for and what that art was cultivated by. And I mean that in a sense of some of this is done on tree bark, some of this is done on rocks, some of this is done on the ground. There is different areas and different aspects of each intricate piece of art that has to do with what the art itself is actually stating or representing. And so I think it's really, really important to keep that in mind throughout this video and throughout this study in general, that these are different pieces and different pieces are symbolizations of different things, and there's no one way to look at things. There's no one rule or particular way for you to visualize these art forms. They are all different, and they are all open to interpretation, in all honesty. So large theory of the afterlife, and not just the afterlife, but this coexisting atmosphere of different realms and different beings and different cultures and different life overall is really, really prevalent in Aboriginal culture, and I've become to really, really notice that a lot, that there are a lot of different avenues and a lot of different ideas in which these pictures come about. And in a lot of it, I'm noticing that there are patterns, and there are patterns that kind of tie in with some of song lines that we see, how we'll see how a piece of art is very, very representative to a place and in a certain feeling from a place, and a certain spiritual connection to that place. And yet we see in these song lines where these songs are being created and these songs are being used to slowly get people from place to place, to tell a story as people go from one place that their ancestors once walked. Another topic that I wanted to bring up was, in relation to all of that, was Mount Uluru. And I wanted to bring up Mount Uluru because I think it helps us to kind of understand the difference in the belief of what the word ancestor really means, especially to Aboriginal cultures. So, to get down into everything, Aboriginal culture is based upon these ancestral beliefs, and these ancestral beliefs, like I said before, are these totemic ancestors who are believed to be plant, animal, and human hybrid or derivatives, however you want to put that. And because of that, there's a lot more of understanding and explanation of the world around them that goes hand in hand with that. For instance, Mount Uluru is meant to have been an ancestor who was slain, and this is where he chose to lay, and because of that, there is this huge, beautiful mountain there that is a sacred place for these people. And I think that it's very imperative and important to note that this is part of their culture, and this is the extent of their culture, and the extent of their belief system is very, very much representative. This belief system is represented throughout the world around them. And these paintings are helping us to understand their belief system a little bit more in depth. And a little bit more clearly than what we may or may not know. And that also ties into some stuff that I think sometimes people forget, that especially in the world we live in, because of how industrialized and how modern everything is, we oftentimes can forget that these native peoples, these indigenous people groups across the world, are groups that have in a lot of ways maintain their own way of living, or have tried to maintain their own way of living, and have tried to maintain their belief system. And the Aboriginals, like Professor Sigmund had pointed out, are one of the few groups that have been able to really preserve their culture despite everything that has gone on with colonization throughout the modern world. And I think that's really, really cool, and it's something that we need, as not only as scientists, but as college students, need to really embrace, that these cultures give us an avenue to really understand ourselves and to understand where we come from as humanity. I'm not necessarily talking about just their belief systems as much as I'm talking about the way that they have gone about life, and the way that they have the intricacy of life and their beliefs, and this really gives us an eye into how humanity really thought at one point in its entirety. And not just, or may have thought, I should say, in its entirety. And I think it's really, really important to respect these cultures and kind of understand that out of the over 60,000 years these people have lived in this area. In over 60,000 years, they've had a multitude of different languages, different cultures in themselves. And yet only 300 of those languages or so still exist to this day. And I think it's very important to note that we have to preserve these certain types of cultures in the best way that we can, because again, these cultures are very, very representative into how humanity once was, and how humanity in a lot of ways can still be. There's different aspects to life. And I think that that's something that Aboriginals, in a lot of ways, this project has really taught me, that there are a lot of different aspects to life itself that are not just about what we see in the Western world. And I think it's really, really important to just note that when you're doing these studies and you're watching this video, just to remember that there's more to everything than what meets the eye. And I think that's the brunt of these pictures, is that there's more to these artworks than what meets the eye. I saw the dots, and the representation of the dots show this symbolic pattern of different pathways and different travels that people can take, and different avenues in which they can almost in a sense view things also. And that's part of this whole Aboriginal art style, is that there's so many ways that you can interpret it, but on top of that, there's so many different ways that these artworks represent this culture. It's not just one piece of artwork representing one little small, way. It's not like a picture of someone hunting specifically, and that's all that that picture meant. It's these pictures meaning that this is the intricacy of life during death, and this is the intricacy of love and happiness in the midst of heartache and sorrow, and it's so deep and rich, and I'm almost blown away by it in a lot of ways. It's awesome. The dreaming really consists of this whole logic of knowledge and wisdom of the universe, while also really, really, really analyzing time and how time has changed and evolved things, but not necessarily just changed and evolved things, how time has really impacted us and our belief system as humanity. And I think that's very important when we look at this, and when we look at Aboriginal art, is in a lot of ways, in Aboriginal art, the beginning of life is 60,000 years ago in a lot of ways. And when these things began to come about, and when these ancestors began to move and die essentially, and create these mountains, and how that paved the way for Mother Light to come in, and the references to how the beginning was is very reminiscent and similar, as Professor Sigmund pointed out, to what we would see in Genesis, and God, giving light and life to the earth. And I thought that that was very, very remarkable, because again, we're looking at cultures that are really, really different and really, really separate, not just geographically, but also culturally are really different, yet you're seeing a lot of overlap and a lot of different similarity. That Professor Sigmund had really pointed out is that there's this very strong belief in out of nothing came everything. And I think that's very powerful, because in each area of the world you see this very similar thought process, that at one point there was nothing and then there was everything. I also really want to point out, because it's important to point out, that there are different aspects in which different cultures have really thought out these theories of how we came to be, or why we came to be. And there tends to be different aspects and different groups, particularly, and I don't mean to quote directly, but I am going to quote Professor Sigmund directly, this emergence and then this cultivation. So emergence versus cultivation in a sense. And I think that because of this, and because of these two separate groups, sometimes we tend to view people, and we tend to view groups with having different viewpoints, but in a lot of ways, despite emergence and cultivation, those kind of go hand in hand, don't they?